The 5 components were designed around, it was more an issue of looking at themes and budgets. One of them is public space, which essentially means improving the public space. The other one is safer schools, which looks at improving the school space, trying to contribute towards making the school a haven for young people to learn and for trainers to teach. The other component was on youth employment to address the issues of low matriculation rates and lack of opportunity. The other one was prevention of domestic violence. The 5th component was pilot housing. Over and above those 5 components, there was the need to integrate them. So there was a community side, community participation, which is cross-cutting. There were issues of gender, but in between there was also the issue of empowering communities through a community development fund, where community projects that do not, or community ideas that do not fall neatly in any of the 5 components, but are good ideas, could then be funded and implemented by community groups themselves.
One needs to understand social development as a process. It's not an event, it's not a moment. You cannot go into any community in the size of Helenvale that have a 69% youth community that's got these high levels of unemployment, at high density levels, to just imagine that you will come in and bring change. This is a community, in my view, that has been isolated over 6 decades. There's a system that operates, and people that is not part of the system may only see the chaos, may only see unemployment. But it's in fact a beautiful system that is operating, and that system has been created by the people themselves. I'm not sure in social facilitation in a very broad scale whether there's any successes, whether you can ascribe success to social facilitation. I think it's a dynamic process that shifts and changes, and it takes different forms at different times. You cannot, if somebody asks me how's Helenvale, you cannot describe how's Helenvale, you know. A moment like this can erupt into something terribly violent, and 10 minutes later it's all peaceful again and kids play outside.
So we looked at what we could do from a municipal perspective. Remember, a lot of these things are issues that is not squarely in the domain or the competency of the municipality. It's other government departments that had to play a role in some of these spaces. Education, health, etc. is not necessarily municipal competencies. But SPUU allowed us the scope to broaden that a little bit, to look at partnerships with other government departments, etc. So out of the social consultations with the community, the social compact process, the baseline studies that was done, the physical analysis of the area, etc., we actually sort of packaged that into a couple of approaches. We synthesized a lot of projects, a lot of proposals into a number of components. And those components really spoke to a situational approach in terms of what you do in a particular space. Also a social approach. So what could communities do, and how can we galvanize what was there already in terms of how the communities from a social perspective responded to their own issues. There's a lot of division in community structures. It's a highly contested space. So anybody that comes in there with the best of intentions needs to navigate that space. So you would have to build a lot of trust, build a lot of relationships, mend a lot of fences, and you've got to keep doing that. So that is often underestimated in the programming, in the timing, that we don't adequately plan and accommodate those processes. So it's not impossible to work in Helenvale. It just takes a lot longer than you and I think it would. So it was agreed that we will follow the social compact process, and various organizational structures like education, youth, sports, business, health, organize themselves in stakeholder forum groupings. And that was the basis that we started with. How do we engage with the community?
Before forming the program advisory committee, there was quite an apathy within the community around community-based organizations. They were split, they were fragmented, they were not coherent. So what happened, in short, we have about 3 or 4 general meetings with various stakeholders where we debated, or the community in fact debated extensively in terms of what kind of organization, what kind of structure is needed to advise the Mandela Bay Development Agency. After a lot of debate, it was then agreed that let's go and have direct representation. So we shifted from organizational representation to direct representation, meaning elections by the people for the people. So we went into the 4 wards. We have extensive campaigning, mobilizing, informing communities about meetings where communities elected 5 representatives from each ward. We invited the people came to the meetings, and they elected 5 per VD. We call it VDs. And that gave us the 20 people that formed the Program Advisory Committee.
I'm a member on the Program Advisory Committee, and I'm also a newly elected Ward Committee member. We meet every second Tuesday of the month. We have a meeting, and the other 2 Tuesdays, it's like a kind of a dialogue where we, without MBDA, we just sit and discuss what issues we had around in the community. And we get information from MBDA, and then we have to give it to the community to guide the community in what happened with the projects, who will benefit from the projects, who's involved in the projects.
It was very difficult to sell PAC. It was not easy. Most of the people elected were ordinary community people with no track record as activists, no track record in community work, etc. Helenvale people were for so long excluded from mainstream that there's almost a belief there of Helenvale for Helenvale. And to break through and allow people to see the bigger picture was quite a challenge in itself. And we approached that through various interventions to kind of break the ice. It was also kind of not instructed but subtly requested that this community-based structure needs to take the form of a non-political party affiliation. So they wanted a non-partisan kind of structure. That lent itself to a challenge from the political parties that I want to believe were used to usurping power, and now they were told to take a backseat. So that kind of led to huge conflict, because when the ward committees were then elected, or the particular ward committee, it swung to a particular political party. And that political party's view was that everything within Helenvale per se supposed to be governed by them. Very interesting dynamic that you had a DA ward councillor, you had a ward committee dominated by the ANC, and then you have the SPUU Program Advisory Committee, and that dynamic was quite a challenge to continue to negotiate or navigate between the 3.
The SPU program, for me, has tried to encapsulate the major problems in Helenvale, in that it's not just a physical problem in Helenvale, it's also a social problem. You've also got a socio-economic problem. So any intervention that either looks at housing or looks at public spaces and ignores the social amenities is never going to achieve immediate, or well, it's not sustainable in the long term. So if there's any new ideas that came through the SPU, is to actually look at a holistic approach to Helenvale, improving the living spaces which we were directly involved in, but that was just as important to improve safety, to ensure that the facilities were provided, and the other element of it that I thought was quite positive was the fact that municipal housing delivery by its nature requires the municipality to deliver the housing, and the communities are generally non-participants in that. They receive a house when it's completed. The SPU program emphasized the need for involvement of communities, from skills training, from the type of house that they would go, and the preferences were worked out in there.
But what gives me hope is that it's not time to walk away yet. There is still lots to be done. It's the people of Helenvale. It's a bit of a cliche, but once you start engaging, once you build and foster relationships, there's a lot of good that's happening. So that gives me sort of a grounding of it makes a difference in the lives of people. If you speak to the youngsters of the youth dialogue, if you speak to the ladies that are, doing things that they previously did not have the confidence to do, people that are using the services, the counseling services in the schools. If you speak to the school and they say, you guys cannot stop what you're doing in the Safer Schools program. We cannot afford to. That gives me hope that we are needed. We are need to do a lot more. It is not time to say, okay, back up, let's leave, because there hasn't been. Yes, there's been challenges. Yes, we've learned a lot of lessons. We've learned the things that we thought would make a difference doesn't really make that big of a difference.